All right, well, Quanos people, we are in the middle of a series this summer on the parables of Jesus, or if you're new here, that's where we've been for the last little while. That's where we are going for the next little while. And the parables of Jesus, they're amazing to look at because they all strike us in different ways. Each parable has its own unique power. Some are very inspirational, some are very challenging. And right at the outset, as we look at this one, not such a well-known one as the last few weeks, is it? And right at the outset, I'm going to say this parable just rubs us wrongly. Especially if you grew up on the West Coast, if you grew up just even in the Western world, this parable rubs us the wrong way. It's because here Jesus is speaking about kind of the marks of a Christian. What does a Christian look like? And Jesus describes it in terms, well, that aren't really popular nowadays. He talks about slaves and masters. He talks about authority and obedience. And he drops a four-letter word. Oh, yes, Jesus, definitely here on the West Coast, it's a four-letter word. He talks about duty. Duty. Duty, of course, is something that you got to do regardless of whether it brings you happiness or fulfillment or not. It's duty. Such subjects are, of course, not very popular here on the West Coast because here on the West Coast, we are marked by what we might call free-spirited individualism. We don't make choices based on duty or maybe what some, authority figure says that we must believe or something that we must do. We make our choices here on the West Coast based on what makes us happy, what makes us feel good, what makes us feel, we're being true to who we are. In fact, as I alluded to last week, Mark Wexler, who is the chair of the Graduate Business School at Simon Fraser University, he shows that many people actually immigrate to Canada and specifically to the West Coast precisely because they are trying to get away from things that have constrained them, from authority figures, from all kinds of people maybe who have been constricting their way of life. You can see this, for instance, in people's spiritual beliefs. People in British Columbia are less likely to be involved in organized religion than anywhere else in the country. Of course, West Coast people do value spirituality, but our spirituality is very individual. It's very private. It has nothing to do with authority figures saying you must believe this or you must act in a certain way or duties or those kind of things. So to West Coast people, I say all that, to West Coast people, this parable that Jesus is bringing up is kind of like for us jumping into a mountain river. You know when you ever do that, you jump into that river, and what does it do? It shocks you, right? It shocks your sensibilities. It takes your breath away for a moment. That's what Jesus' parable, I think, initially does to us. But if you've ever jumped into a mountain river, you also know there is that immediate shock, and sometimes you even think, man, this is terrible. But then when you get out, you feel more alive than you have ever felt before. You just are like, I am alive. And I think that's exactly what Jesus' parable does for us. When we first look at it, we talk about slaves, masters, obedience, authority, duty. We're like, man, that's very shocking to our sensibilities. We do not like that kind of stuff. But I think if we stay in this and we walk it through with Jesus, we will see that actually this leads us to a happiness and to a fulfillment, to a feeling of being alive like we've never felt before. So, this is Luke 17. I didn't print for you the beginning of Luke 17 in your folder, but Luke 17 is all about what does it look like to be a disciple of Jesus. And in verses 1 to 3, Jesus talks about how a Christian is marked by not causing other people to sin. Then in verses 4 and 5, he says a Christian is marked by unlimited forgiveness. Then in verse 6, he says a Christian is one who exercises faith. And then Jesus tells this parable where he describes at least 4 further marks of what a Christian looks like. So let's see, what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? What does it mean to be a Christian? And look at these 4 marks together. You ready to jump into the river? Let's jump in. Mark number 1. A Christian views him or herself as a servant of Jesus the Master. A Christian views him or herself as a servant of Jesus the Master. Now, in the Bible, there's all kinds of images and metaphors that God gives to help us understand who He is and who we are. Master is not the only image. As we've seen in some of these other parables, Jesus is a father, or God is a father. God is a king. God is a judge. God is a bridegroom. There's all kinds of images. So God is more than just a master, but He is certainly not less. Same with us. Whether God is Father tells us that we are children. Here in this image, we see that Jesus, or God, is Master, which then makes us servants. So Jesus introduces this master-slave metaphor by telling us a story about a farmer who has one servant, that is, one slave. Now, we, I think, immediately react to this image of slaves, and we do it because we take all of our modern ideas of slavery and we impose them onto the ancient world. We impose them onto Jesus' story. And so, of course, our modern ideas of slavery have to do with race. They have to do with terrible injustices that have gone on. And so then we feel sorry for this slave in the story. That's our immediate reaction. But maybe right away we should say maybe we're not quite on track, because this slave doesn't feel sorry for himself, and neither should we. You see, old world slavery, ancient slavery in Jesus' time, was very different from what we might call new world slavery. That is the slavery of the Great Britain, the slavery, of course, of the United States. That kind of slavery has to do with ripping people away, stealing people, for instance, away from Africa, turning them into slaves, and it's based upon race, right? So you can easily, in the United States, in the days of slavery, you could easily recognize a slave by their skin color. Not so in the ancient world. If you walk down the street in Rome, you would have no idea who the slaves were a lot of the time. In fact, a lot of slaves could be more educated and more wealthy than a lot of free people. Slavery in the ancient world had nothing to do with race. Slavery in the ancient world had many causes and many reasons. It was a very diverse and complex thing. But one of the reasons why people became slaves was because of debt. So you borrow money from a creditor, and let's say something happens in your life and you cannot pay back that debt. Your creditor then has all kinds of rights against you. So as we saw in the parable, the unmerciful servant, your creditor could say, for instance, throw him in prison and throw his family in prison. Everybody goes in prison until he can pay off the debt. But obviously, you can't pay it off if you're in prison. Another option was that your creditor could then take you as his slave. And so what happened in that situation is that you and your family would go and live with your master, and yes, you would be his slave. But it was kind of like a repayment method. So you would owe a certain amount of money. Your master then was now responsible to care for you, for your family, to provide food and to provide lodging for you. And you, in turn, had to work for him until you could pay back your debt. So there was no bankruptcy or anything like that in ancient times. So although this may not be, the greatest of situations, that's a whole lot better than being thrown in prison. Not only that, if you could repay your debts, you would then get to be free again. So it had nothing to do with your race or anything like that. It had to do with debt is one of the ways people became slaves. Now, of course, depends on your owner, your master, on what kind of life you got to live. Maybe if your master was harsh, yeah, it was going to be a tough life for you. And there were harsh masters. But there were also benevolent masters. And so as we come and look at this parable, we see no reason in this parable to think that this master is harsh. And there's no reason to think the slave is not grateful to serve his master. So that's just a little quick Bible lesson on don't impose all of your modern ideas onto a text and just say, I want nothing to do with that, because maybe you haven't fully understood it. We learn from this then right away that a Christian is one who believes that their sin is like a debt to God. That we saw this in the parable of the unmerciful servant. It's like a $6 billion debt. That's what our sin is. But God is a gracious master. Oh, what a gracious master. Rather than throwing us into an eternal prison, which would be just for our sin, God, as a gracious master, sends his son to pay the debt that we owe. So we get to go free, and Jesus pays the debt for us. God did not ask us to pay back our debt. We never could have done it. He simply paid it back himself. And then he says to us, I've paid this debt for you out of love and out of grace. And now I'm asking you to serve me as your response to me paying off your debt. So you know you're a Christian if, first of all, you say, yes, I've sinned against God. And then secondly, you say, man, I could never repay God for my sins. Oh, but Jesus paid my debt. Oh, God, thank you that you paid my debt. I am so grateful. And because you've done this for me, take my life, as we sang. Let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Do with me whatever you will, for you have shown me such love and grace. You are a gracious master. Kind of makes me think of one of my favorite novels is The Count of Monte Cristo. And a while ago they made it into a movie. I think it's getting a little old now. But in the movie version, the main character, Edmond Dantes, he escapes out of his prison and he swims. It's an island prison. He swims to the shore. He wakes up on the shore only to be surrounded by pirates. And the pirates basically say to him, you're going to have a knife fight with this other smuggler named Jacopo, and whoever wins the knife fight gets to be a slave on our pirate ship and gets to be part of us. So it's a knife fight to the death. So him and Jacopo, they have this big knife fight, and Edmond Dantes beats Jacopo. He has him on the ground. He has the knife, but instead of killing him, he gives him mercy. And then he speaks with the pirate captain, and he says, you can have 2 pirates on your ship instead of just 1. You've already had your entertainment, and so why don't you take us both? And the pirate captain agrees. Jacopo then is so overwhelmed by the mercy that has been shown to him. He takes him aside, he grabs him by the shirt, he pulls him close, and he says to him, I am yours forever. He says, I swear to you, I am your man forever. And he becomes his servant for life. That's kind of a good image. So right away, we got to ask ourselves, is Jesus our master in that sense? Are you his servant? Have you seen what he has done for you? Have you grasped the magnitude of his grace and his love in paying off your debt, in showing you mercy? You know you're a Christian if you've seen that. And then you've said to him, oh, Jesus, thank you. I am yours forever. Command me as you will. That's the first mark of a Christian. A Christian views him or herself as a servant of Jesus the Master. It's the second mark now where Jesus uses the 4-letter word. In the second place, a Christian believes that he or she must perform duties for Jesus the Master. So let's look at this parable. In this parable, Jesus asks a question that's supposed to have an obvious answer. Look at verse 7 with me. Verse 7. Will any of you who has a servant plowing or keeping sheep say to him when he has come in from the field, come at once and recline at the table? Now, to modernize this, since Quanos is here, let's use some Quanos examples. This would be kind of like, I think you guys have had a couple days of training already. You've just kind of arrived at camp. You have an entire summer ahead of you. Imagine after all this training and after, you go and debrief at the end of today, Scott says, all right, everybody line up. Here's your paychecks for summertime. And I know you guys make a lot of money. So, you're ready to go and just party it up for the rest of the year based on your salaries. And so he hands you your checks and he says, thanks for all the work that you've done. You can go and relax now. Would Scott ever do that? To parallel Jesus' question. No, Scott's not going to do that. I hate to break it to you. And the obvious answer, it's just kind of a dumb question, isn't it? It's a really dumb question. That's why Jesus is asking, guys, would a master do this with his servant? No, he wouldn't. Why not? Because the servant or the Quanos staff, you have duties that must be performed throughout the summertime before it's all done and before you get your paycheck. That's exactly what Jesus is saying here. Once a slave has finished his duties, he's free to relax. He's free to go and have his own dinner and do whatever he wants. But he's only free to do this after he's completed his duties. And so Jesus says in verse 10, so also, when you've done all that you were commanded, say we are unworthy servants. We have only done what was our duty. So let's pause and let's digress for a moment now and talk about this concept of duty. Duties, of course, are obligations that we are required to fulfill regardless of how we feel about them, regardless of what consequences they may be. They are duties that we must perform. And so as his servants, Jesus says to us, I have duties for you to perform. If you're a Christian, he says, you're now mine, you're now my servant, I have duties that I want you to perform in this life. And the scriptures outline all kinds of them. For instance, first of all, your highest duty above all is to worship and to love God. To do that privately, to do that corporately. Nothing comes before the duty of loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then we have all kinds of other duties in loving our neighbor, turning the other cheek, forgiving, loving people, being honest, being patient, caring for the poor, loving your spouse, being content, using your money in a way that is generous. And, of course, being sexually pure, praying, and submitting to governing authorities. These are some of the duties that Jesus, as our master, gives to us as his servant. It doesn't matter how we feel about them. They are the duties that our master gives us. But again, on the West Coast, this is very countercultural. Why do we have such a hard time with this idea of duty? I was thinking about it, and I think it's partly because of just the generation we're born in. Even if you're like kind of post-1960s. I think about my grandfather, for instance. And in my grandfather, maybe if you're older, you can tell me if this is totally true of your generation or not. But this is wide stereotypes right now. My grandfather, I never heard him talk about, we need to... My greatest thing in life, he would never say, is, I need to be true to me. I need to pursue my desires and whatever makes me happy. Those categories didn't even enter into his mind. My grandfather talked about things like, I have duties towards God. I have duties towards my family to provide for them, to protect them and these kind of things. I have duties towards my church. I'm committed to my church. I serve there and those kind of things. And the ultimate proof that he didn't think about the way we normally do is he felt he had a duty to his country. And that's proven in the fact that he put his life on the line by going into World War II. I mean, if your highest value is being true to me and my own happiness, you don't go into war. So that generation, to me anyways, seemed to think quite differently than we as a generation do today. And it's largely kind of the 1960s changed a lot. Woodstock changed a lot. So if you grew up 1960s or you're post-Woodstock, you grew up with a very different mentality. And if you're really young today, you just think this is normal. It's like a fish in water. You don't even know the water's there because you just grew up with a completely different mentality. And here's the mentality now. Today, the highest duty is not duty in general. The highest duty is to myself. I am my highest duty. My fulfillment, my happiness, my self-actualization, being true to who I am, this is the highest duty that was given to us when we were kids in school. The whole way culture has gone. Be true to you. Be sincere. Be who you are. Pursue your own happiness and fulfillment. That's very different. There's been a big shift this way. But here's what's interesting to me. After 50 years of this kind of like self-focused duty and this side, there's a lot of literature that's coming out that's saying that we as a generation, like right from, say, 40 to 50 years old and down, we are less fulfilled and less happy than our grandparents' generation. Why would that be? It was all supposed to lead to greater happiness, to greater fulfillment. And many people argue that it's precisely the fact that as a generation we were raised without objective duties, without objective truth, without religion that has led to this. This is even what secular authors, I'm not talking about Christian authors here, I'm talking about psychologists, secular authors. One sociologist, for instance, his name's Douglas Copeland, total secular guy, grew up in North Vancouver, has written all kinds of books on generational understanding. He wrote one famous little book entitled Life After God, and the title captures everything. In the book, he says to us, you are the first generation raised without religion. If you're in, especially the Western world, I assume is what he's talking about. You are not your grandparents' generation. You were raised without religion. And then he asks, what happens if we are raised without religion and beliefs? And Copeland then goes on to show how growing up in North Vancouver, his parents were exactly those kind of people. They said, we're not going to impose any values on you. You can make up all your own values. We will not tell you how to live. We will not give you any of these kind of things. You are free to determine it yourself. And so he says, what was the result of that? He says that he, his friends, and his studies have shown that he grew up finding that there was no meaning in life. He was having great difficulty in relationships. All the relationships kept breaking down. They didn't understand how to do relationships, and they felt lonely to the core. But this disillusionment kind of makes sense, because follow me on this carefully. If you grew up in a society where you're taught that this world is all there is, then of course what you're going to do is you're going to try and just squeeze as much happiness out of this life as you possibly can. But if you try to do that, you'll quickly learn, as everybody does, that this world cannot provide you with that deep sense of meaning, that deep sense of value. All those things that you crave, they just can't be found in anything. They can't be found in endless kind of hookups and sexual relationships. They can't be found in drugs and alcohol. They can't be found in status symbols and great jobs and lots of money. Everybody eventually learns this rule. Other generations were happier, so many argue, because they did not believe that this world is all there is. That was a big key to their happiness. They believed in another world after this one. So then the issue for them was not just me and my happiness. That was not the question. The question was, how do I live in a way that rightly lines up with objective truth that's outside of me, line up with the existence of a God, line up with the values of a world to come? And so the values of God and of the world to come became the duties of this world. And so they never expected that in this world you were going to find perfect happiness or self-actualization or things like that, because you couldn't do it. So what I'm trying to show you here is that in rejecting God, our generation has failed to find the happiness that we actually want. But I'm going to also argue that this is not just a generational thing. This is a human race thing. It's a human race thing in this sense. At the very core of all of our struggles to find meaning and happiness and fulfillment and all those kind of things is a lie. It's a lie about God, and it's a lie about the issue of duty. It goes right back to the very beginning of the human race, and this is the lie, that the duties that God puts upon us hinder and ruin human freedom, and they actually show that God as our master is not really for us. Isn't this exactly what happened in the garden? Adam and Eve are there. They're living amongst all of this beautiful stuff. They can do whatever they want. God has put kind of one rule upon them. Don't eat from this one tree. And what does the serpent say to them? What does he come along and tell them to do? He comes along and he begins to question. He basically says to them, if God would give you that rule, God's actually hindering you. God's rules hinder you. They ruin your fun. They ruin what it means to be fully human. If you want to be fully human, the serpent is saying, you actually need to disobey God. But what was going on underneath that? Yeah, he was challenging God up on the top level, saying, no, God's holding you back. His rules, his duties, they cannot lead you to happiness. But underneath, what's he really doing? It's character assassination. He's saying, your master does not love you. Your master is holding you back. Your master is not for you. Your master is against you. He's trying to ruin your life with these ridiculous rules that he's giving you. You need to break free, and then you'll find true happiness and true freedom. But is that exactly what happened? Now, Genesis 3 to 11 go on for all these chapters to just show over and over again what happens when human beings reject God. Genesis 3 right away. Adam and Eve's relationship, they begin blaming each other. Right away, first marital fight. Everything starts to happen. Genesis 4, Cain kills Abel. Genesis 5 and 6, we've got the flood. You just go on and on. Lamech and his revenge. It's all one big example to say it's a lie. It's a lie what you believe, that your master is not for you. It's a lie that his duties are going to destroy your freedom and hinder your humanness. No. The liberating truth comes when you realize that God, as your master, is for you. He gave the garden. He gave the world. He gave you everything. He is for you. And all of his rules, if he makes them, are also for you. Like any good father, God gives rules to his children. But listen carefully. I never make up rules for my kids just to ruin their lives. Right? They sometimes think I do. But I never sit there scheming away, like, what kind of rules could I make up today that would just totally wreck them, make them feel discouraged? How How could I come up with something like that? I don't sit around and do that. If I ever make up rules, and I'm a fallible human father, maybe sometimes I get it wrong, but I only ever make rules to protect their freedom and to enhance their freedom. And that is exactly what God is doing for us. God, I'm trying to show you, I've taken all this time on God as master and our duties as servants because, listen, follow this carefully in your own heart. At the root of all your unhappiness, at the root of all your struggles with sin is this idea that God as your master is not for you. That his duties that he's given to you prove he's against you. That's the lie underneath everything. But what kills that lie, as we've just seen, is the cross of Jesus Christ. If God would give up his only son for you to pay off the debt that you could not pay, does that not prove that your master is for you? That he gave you life and breath and everything else, that he gave you this world, does that not prove that he is for you? Look to the cross, look to creation, defeat the lie that says the master is against you. The master only gives you duties to try to ruin you. So to recap everything then, so far, a Christian views him or herself as a servant to Jesus the master, and a Christian believes that they have duties to perform for Jesus, duties which are for our good. Let's press this home in an application now with the third mark. In the third place, then, a Christian strives for total obedience to Jesus, the Master. We've been given duties, and you know you're a Christian. One of the marks of a Christian is, I want to obey him. Doesn't mean we'll do it perfectly, but it says, I want to obey him. The servant in this parable does not just do his duties only halfway. He doesn't come in the house after being in the field and just sit down and relax. No, he went and made supper. And so Jesus, if you look at verse 10 again, says, so also, when you have done part of all that you were commanded to do, no, not part, when you have done all that you were commanded, say, we are unworthy servants. We've only done what was our duty. Done all. So slaves don't make conditions or qualifications on what they're supposed to do. A slave does not obey only when they understand exactly why they have to, or will this bring me happiness? No. See, if you obey God only when you feel like it, then you are actually still the master. If you say, sure, I'll obey those rules, those are no problem, but those ones I'm not even going to try on that, you are actually still saying, I'm the master. I'm not submitting to him as master. No, you are only agreeing when you are a servant. You are to say, Jesus, command me as you will. Empower me to serve you. Allow me, then, give me the grace to obey everything you have commanded me, and forgive me when I don't. Isn't this part of the point of Robert Munger's famous, I was going to say Robert Munch. No, that's the guy, a different guy, isn't it? I got kids and kids' stories. Robert Munger's famous little story entitled My Heart, Christ's Home. He pictures our hearts as kind of a house. And when Jesus moves into your house, he radically changes everything. He's out for your good. He wants to rebuild you. And in that little booklet, he says, in the joy of this new relationship, I said to Jesus Christ, Lord, I want this heart of mine to be yours. I want to have you settle down here and be perfectly at home. Everything I have belongs to you. That's the good attitude of a servant. And so Jesus then in the story begins to clean up all the rooms, right? For instance, in the living room, there's some magazines that he sees, and they shouldn't be there. So with Jesus' help, the man in his heart says, okay, let's clean that out. Let's obey everything he's commanded. And then he goes on, and the story reads like this. One day I found him waiting for me at the door. As I entered, he said to me, there's a peculiar odor in the house. Something must be dead around here. It's upstairs. I think it's in the hall closet. As soon as he said this, I knew what he was talking about. There was a small closet up there on the hall landing, just a few feet square. In that closet, behind lock and key, I had one or two little personal things that I did not want anyone to know about. I knew they were dead and rotting things left over from the old life. Reluctantly, I went up with him. And as we mounted the stairs, the odor became stronger and stronger. He pointed to the door. I was angry. That's the only way I can put it. I had given him access to the library, the dining room, the living room, the workroom, the rec room, and now he was asking me about a little 2x4 closet. I said to myself, this is way too much. I'm not going to give him the key. Well, he said, reading my thoughts, if you think I'm going to stay up here on the second floor with this smell, you are mistaken. I will go out on the porch. Then I saw him start down the stairs. When one comes to know and love Christ, the worst thing that can happen is to sense him withdrawing his fellowship. I had to give in. I'll give you the key, I said sadly, but you will have to open the closet and clean it out. I haven't the strength to do it. Just give me the key, he said. With trembling fingers, I passed the key to him. He took it, walked over to the door, opened it, entered, took out all that putrefying stuff that was rotting there, and threw it away. Then he cleaned the closet and painted it. Oh, what victory and release to have that dead thing out of my life. A Christian is one who strives for total obedience to Jesus the Master. So I ask you today, what's the closet in your life? What's that area maybe that you've been holding back for a long time? And Jesus is saying to you, I'm a good master. I'm for you. I'm not against you. Come, give me the key to that. Let's work on this area of this area of your life. I don't want this dead stuff in your life. I want you to be alive. And so come and allow me to change that area. What is the Spirit putting his finger on right now in your life? Come before Jesus and say, take the key. Come and clean that area out. I want to obey you in all things. I am your servant. Allow me to do that. Fourth and final mark. I know it's warm in here. Stay with me. A Christian obeys out of delight for Jesus the Master. This is the final one. A Christian obeys out of delight. Not obedience in order to achieve acceptance with God our Master, but we obey out of delight. Now, so far, what I've been doing in this message, I've just been kind of drawing out the broad themes of the parable. I've been trying to remove some of this cultural baggage that we have with it. But now I want to come to really examine what's the point of this, because it's a little bit odd. It seems like Jesus is saying to us, do your duty and don't expect any thanks from me. That's kind of how we first read it, right? But let me show you that's not the case. Follow with me through this parable. Jesus begins by putting us in the mind of the master. And Jesus asks three questions, all of which have very obvious answers. We looked at the first one. So if a servant comes home at supper, would the master say to him, go, get changed, relax, I'll make my own supper? No. His duties are only half done. It's kind of like a waitress showing up, giving you the menus and saying, all right, where's the tip? You'd say, you haven't done your job yet. And that's exactly what's going on here. So a servant, first of all, is one who wants to do all these duties for Jesus the Master. Now here comes the second question in verse 8. Will he, that's the master, not rather say to him, prepare supper for me and dress properly and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterward you will eat and drink? Isn't that what he'd say? And the obvious answer is yes, of course. The servant is allowed to eat. Yes, of course he's allowed to eat. But he's only allowed to eat when he's completed his duties. Jesus asks the third question, verse 9. Does he thank the servant because he did what was commanded? Now here's the heart of the matter. Jesus is not here speaking against common courtesy and just saying, thank you for bringing my dinner and stuff. No. The word thanks here, that's a great literal interpretation. It captures it well, but it doesn't capture maybe the essence of the thought. Jesus is asking here, does the master need to thank his servant in the sense that, thank you, and now I'm in your debt. Now I owe you something because you've done this for me. Does his master need to thank him in that sense of the word? And obviously the answer is no. The master is not indebted to his slave in any way. This is the slave's duty. And so perhaps you could think of it like this. Maybe you're a CEO of a company, and at the end of the year, one of your employees comes up and says, now that I've worked for you the whole year, do you think I could, borrow your lake house and your boat and all that kind of stuff? I've worked really hard for you, so I kind of feel like you owe that to me. A CEO is not going to do that. You've done your job. Thank you for doing your job. I really appreciate that. But you doing your job and your duties does not put me in your debt so that now I owe you all kinds of more things. The master or the CEO is never in the debt of the one who is working for him or her. And so God may reward us out of generosity, and he does. But God never rewards us because he owes us. We are the one who owe him everything. And the point here is obvious, isn't it? You do not gain favor and merit by just doing your duties. You don't gain favor that way. You don't put God in your debt because you obey him. And that's what Jesus is saying. Even after we've done all of our duties for him, even if we've done them perfectly, we're still to come before him and say, we are just unworthy servants. We've only done what was our duty. Unworthy, again, don't misunderstand. It doesn't mean useless. God has tremendous worth in his people. Tremendous. He values his servants greatly. But what this is going on here, this is kind of an expression of humility. It's saying, Jesus, you are the master. I am the servant. I want to serve you with all I am. And when I'm done serving you, I don't believe I put you in my debt. I'm not trying to earn your favor because I know I already have it. I don't feel like you owe me anything because somehow I've served faithfully at Quanos for a summer. I've served faithfully for 40 years in church or whatever. You don't owe me anything. So do you see how liberating and how inspiring this can be then? This is very liberating because it shows us that we do not have this kind of performance-based relationship with God. And that's terrible. You don't want that. Because if you're the servant and you're billions of dollars in debt, if you view your relationship with God as one where it's performance-based, where you think, if I can just work hard enough, if I can serve faithfully enough, maybe one day I will gain his acceptance. Oh, what a terrible road that is to walk. Terrible, because on the one hand, you'll be filled up with pride. You'll think, I've done a lot. How come God's not doing better with me? On the other hand, you'll just fall into despair. Because you'll think, man, I've tried so hard, but we do sin all the time. Now, maybe God will never accept me now. But we see here that God does not relate to us on a performance basis. He doesn't owe us anything, but he's taken us in his grace, made us his servants. So listen carefully. This is so liberating because you don't have to work to earn God's favor. In Jesus Christ, you already have it. That's the good news. You don't have to try and pay off that debt. He paid it already. And so you're free. You don't have to have a relationship where you're always worried. What does God the Master think of me? Is he going to cast me out? Will he love me? Will he accept me? That is a terrible place to live. And that's what this Bible calls living under the law. It's living under the law because you will always be crushed down. You'll never perform well enough, so you'll never really know if God accepts you. But the good news of the gospel is he doesn't accept you based on what you do. He bases his acceptance for you on what Jesus did for you. And so you're a free servant. You're free to serve him, not to earn his favor, but as an act of love. This is also incredibly inspiring because when you see that God's favor is not dependent on your performance, then your duties, they're no longer drudgery. That's what duty is, right? That's what we think of it. It's drudgery. But when you see you've been loved by God and brought into his family, when you become his servant, drudgery becomes delight. Duty becomes delight. Let me say that correctly. The drudgery turns to delight too. When you see how much Jesus has paid your debt, like Jacopo, you say, oh, what mercy has been given to me. Oh, I can't believe you would pay that debt. I can't believe you would allow me to serve in your house. You would allow me, a mere human being, to serve you, the creator of all. Oh, I am yours forever. I want to serve you. See how that changes everything. Grace changes everything. John Newton, the guy who wrote the famous hymn Amazing Grace, he wrote many other hymns. And here's one that captures this so well. It's called, the title captures it, Love Constrained to Obedience. Listen to these lyrics. How long beneath the law I lay, in bondage and distress. I toiled the precept to obey, but toiled without success. That's the crushing nature of the law. You cannot obey it. Oh, but then listen to the gospel. To see the law by Christ fulfilled and hear his pardoning voice changes a slave into a child and duty into choice. Just focus on those words for a second. Just look to see the law. Christ fulfilled the law where I could not do it. And he pardons me for my failures. So I'm no longer just a slave, I'm a child. And my duties now become my choice. They become my delight. What gives you the power to have joy in serving Christ is seeing all that he has done for you. To see that you already have God's favor so you don't have to earn it. That is how duty ceases to be drudgery. That is how duty becomes delight. You know, one of the best examples of this is whenever you see oh man, this is going to be fun. We got Quanos people here today. You're going to see this at Quanos this summer. I guarantee it. What am I going to see? You're going to see when people fall in love. Not with the campers, right? We don't allow campers to do that kind of stuff. But maybe some of the counselors. I don't know. Hey, I did camp ministry. I know how it works. In fact, full disclosure, my wife and I got engaged when we were head counselors at Sunnybray. So I'm on your team, all right? I am pro fishing off the company dock, but I don't know what your policies are. So, yeah, okay, you have a session on that coming up. PDA was not allowed when we were doing this, so if Scott says you're not allowed to fish off the company dock, then you're not allowed to. But we did. And anyways, here's the point. When you see two young people in love, when you see a guy fall in love with a girl, everything about his life changes, right? I mean, he stops hanging out with all his guy friends a little bit, maybe even gets in trouble from his guy friends. He gives up his time. He gives up his money that has been hard earned, and maybe he's a penny pincher, but he'll drop, $75 at the keg to take his girl out, no problem. Like, where's the MasterCard? Let's just swipe that thing. And then later on, as things progress along, I mean, he'll drop over $1,000 on a ring, and he will be so eagerly getting out that MasterCard or that cash or whatever to throw it down. Just take it. I don't even want this money anymore. There's no duty involved in that. And then he's with her. He's given up his time. He's given up his money. He's doing it. When she asks him to do something, he's just like, all right, no problems. I'll take care of that. In other words, her wish becomes his command. Now, if you ask, well, the cynic's going to say this. The cynic is going to say, man, you're getting married. Marriage is just a ball and a chain. That's all it is. You've given up all your freedoms. Now all you're doing, you got all these duties you got to do. You got to give her your time. You got to give up your money. You got to do all these kind of things. If you said that to that guy, what's his response going to be? He's going to say, duty? What duty? This duty to spend time with her, to spend money on her? That's my delight. Oh yeah, it's a duty. Sure, yes, I'm supposed to love her. Absolutely. Okay. But my duty is my delight. That's how you know when you become a Christian and you get the sense of God's grace in your life and as it begins to fill you, you don't serve him out of drudgery thinking, man, I got to earn his favor. You don't fall into despair thinking, man, I've sinned against him. I'll never get his love. I'll never get his favor. No, you know that you have his favor, and that favor then motivates you to say, Jesus, how can I serve you? Jesus, what can I do for you? How can I use my life and the gift that you've given me? Please show me. I am your man forever, Jesus. That's how duty turns into delight. So that's the big secret. Remember, as we've said many times, religion says, I obey in order to be accepted by God. That's what religion says. But the gospel, what Jesus says, is I am accepted because of what Jesus has done, and therefore I obey. Sometimes we focus on the I am accepted part. That's not today. Well, it's partly today, but today we're focusing on I am accepted and therefore I obey. I want to obey. I want to serve you. I want to use my life for your purposes. And that obedience arises out of the acceptance and not vice versa. So if you're struggling with duty, if you're struggling with obedience, look to the cross. For at the cross you see that God, your master, is for you. Why else would he give you his son? If he's not for you, why would he give you his most beloved son? And he gave him up for you in order that you might be reconciled to him, brought into his family, made his servant in order that you might serve him. Let that fill you to defeat that base lie, that serpent lie that poison has infected every one of us. It is the poisonous lie that is at the bottom of the human race, that our master is not really for us, that our master's duties are drudgery. But when we see in the gospel and you see at the cross, you see, no, that's a lie. The master is for us, and all of his duties are given to us to protect our freedom, to enhance our freedom, and to further promote the glory of his name. Friends, let love constrain you to obedience. Let's pray. Father, forgive us when we have believed the lie. Forgive us when we have thought of you as a cruel taskmaster, as one who is impossible to please. Thank you that in Jesus, you are well pleased with us because of what Jesus has done for us. Thank you for the full favor, the justification before you, the adoption before you. All of these things we praise you, that you in grace have given us your full and complete favor. And Father, as our response, enable us to obey you in all things. Enable us to follow you. For those specific areas maybe where you are speaking with people right now, but areas of sin in their life, give them victory. Help them to lay it before you and to fight it with all of their might, and grant them victory that they may honor you. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.